Good evening, my little pips. I hope you had a nice day and are doing well. I want to take you on a little time travel for the next few videos, where we explore myths and tales from around the world. Our first destination will be ancient Egypt, with its bewitching tales about magic and family drama, my favorite kind of stories. Let's get comfy and have a good time, okay? Ancient Egypt. Ever since classical times, outsiders have been spellbound by the sheer exoticism of ancient Egyptian religion and its associated mythology. The strange panoply of animal-headed gods, jackal-headed Anubis, Ibis top tooth, the Apis bull, the lioness Sekhmet, and the obsession with the death, funerary monuments and mummification, enthralled the archaeologists who rediscovered the nation's heritage from the late 18th century on. Much about the myths remains puzzling, but one factor scholars have increasingly come to appreciate is the longevity of Egyptian civilization, which flourished relatively undisturbed for more than 3 millennia. Then again, they have learned to understand the importance of local traditions. Different towns venerated separate deities, whose statues rose and fell with the city's changing fortunes. A case in point was the rise of the god Amun. In Old Kingdom days, early in Egypt's history, Amun was the local god of Thebes, a relative backwater at the time. From the Middle Kingdom on, however, Thebes assumed central importance as the nation's capital, and Amun's role was similarly magnified. By New Kingdom days, around the 16th century, he had risen to challenge the sun god Re as the supreme deity in the Egyptian pantheon. In the synchronous tradition, by which many clashes of divine authority were resolved, the two gods were subsequently worshipped in composite form as Amun-Re, who remained the nation's principal focus of worship until Thebes' own primacy was overthrown. The focus of the local loyalties underlying much of Egyptian religion fell on temples, which were thought to be the homes of the gods, whose statues adorned them. Priests were employed to keep the god daily fed and cleaned, thereby assuring divine goodwill for the town he or she protected. On rare occasions, a statue might be sent away so that some other community could benefit from its powers. But in such cases, the god's return became a matter of considerable importance. Alternatively, pilgrims from the surrounding region might flock to a particularly sacred site to pay homage to the resident deity at an annual festival. Under the later dynasties, citizens found solace in a newer, more populist religion. Its central myth concerned a dysfunctional divine family, children of the earth deity Geb and the sky goddess Nut. Chief among them was the compassionate Isis, who took her own brother Osiris as her husband, for in ancient Egypt, gods and pharaohs alike were exempted from the incest taboo. But the couple's marital harmony roused the jealousy of another brother, Set. Who are our 3 little siblings though? Who are Isis, Osiris, and Set? Isis came to be viewed as a personification of love and compassion, occupying rather the same role for Egyptians that the Virgin Mary would later play for Christians. She was also the only goddess that could use magic. Imagine that. None other god was able to use any magic besides her. Osiris' main function was to rule the underworld, but he also acted as god of fertility and agriculture. One of the most enduring deities, he was worshipped throughout Egypt as patron of the dead, lord of necropolis, and the guarantor of rebirth. Osiris was of prime importance in Egyptian mythology. As a god of fertility, he was seen as the life force behind all things. Yet at the same time, he was lord of the underworld, and this combination of aspects led him to be identified with resurrection. As in almost any religion, evildoers were damned and the righteous ones could look forward to a nice afterlife in the heavenly fields of Aru. The last one in our sibling trio is Set, Lord of Disorder. In very early times, Set was worshipped at his cult center on Nakada, and because he was associated with the frightening desert sandstorms of the region, it was important to appease him. He ultimately became a lord of misrule and chaos. Like most Egyptian gods, Set was often pictured with the head of an animal, usually the strange Set beast, an imaginary creature with a vague resemblance to an ant-eater. Sometimes he was depicted as one of the animals considered to be unclean by the Egyptians, such as the hippopotamus or the pig. Set's immense strength and his forceful sexuality guaranteed him the devotion of at least a minority of mortals. Although rarely a popular god, he did have his good points, and appeal to Set, the Lord of Chaos, might help keep bad weather away. Indeed, at one point in Egypt's history, during the 19th and 20th dynasties, he enjoyed a period of general worship and respect. But Set was always a dangerous god to venerate. Later dynasties characterized him as the god of harm, and he generally came to be regarded as the personification of evil doing. Something also interesting to note about the trio is that Set is the only one with an animal head, while Isis and Osiris had both human heads, like you and I. So now that we know a little about these three, let's start with our first real story. One Egyptian myth told of a time when Osiris ruled the world beneficently, with his sister wife Isis as his consort. This happy state of affairs roused the jealousy of the monarch's brother Set. According to the best-known version of the story, he constructed a wooden box, in effect, the first sarcophagus, to Osiris' exact measurements, and then at the feast challenged the guests to see who fitted it most closely. When Osiris took his turn to step inside, Set slammed the lid shut, fastened it with lead, and threw the coffin into the river Nile. Horrified by her husband's murder, Isis devoted herself to the task of finding his body. When she finally succeeded in tracking it down, Set intervened again, this time dismembering the body and scattering the parts across Egypt. Isis once again set out on the trail. She eventually traced 13 of the 14 separate parts, all but the penis, which had been swallowed by a fish, so Isis had to fashion one from gold. Then she reassembled his scattered limbs in the form of the first mummy, and used magical incantations so that his spirit could inhabit his body once again. The couple were reunited long enough for Isis to conceive the infant Horus. Then Osiris had to return once more to his underworld domain to take up his duties as merciful judge of the dead. I'm a little surprised how no one tried to stop Set here, imprisoning Horus in the first sarcophagus. There must have been a lot of people on the feast now. So why did no one really hinder Set? Isis faced great hardships in tracking down the pieces of her dismembered husband Osiris, so she could magically resurrect him. Yet her trials were not over, for he died a second time soon after he made her pregnant with their child Horus. Then, in her renewed widowhood, she fell into the hands of her husband's killer. Her evil brother Set imprisoned her, ordering her to weave a shroud for Osiris, who had returned to the underworld kingdom from which Isis' magic had temporarily summoned him. Yet, even at this low point in her fortunes, Isis had friends among the gods. The wise Thoth saw her plight and determined to assist her, freeing her from the liner mill where she was held. He provided her with an escort of 7 scorpions, who each swore to protect the goddess and her unborn son from Set's vengeance. the strange band set off for the marshes of the Nile Delta. On their way, they came to a village, where Isis determined to seek food and shelter. The first house that she approached belonged to a wealthy noblewoman who, not recognized the goddess, slammed the door in her face. Unabashed, Isis soon found a poor peasant girl who welcomed her into her humble home. The scorpions were enraged by the rich woman's treatment of the goddess, and so they prepared to avenge their mistress. One of them crept into the noblewoman's house and stung her young son. As the boy lay dying, his mother ran through the streets crying for help. But due to her earlier inhospitality, no one came to her aid. Isis, however, took pity on the boy, not wishing to see him suffer on his mother's account, and so she cast a powerful spell over him to neutralize the poison. The child recovered at once. His mother, truly repentant, gave all her belongings to Isis and the kindly peasant girl. I really love how Isis is not at all vengeful or, how do you say, has a grudge against the people that cross her. That also shows her motherly side and her compassionate side that we read about earlier. Tod and the Eye of Horus. Born to the knowledge that his father Osiris had been killed by Set, Horus was fated to be an agent of divine vengeance. From the time of his early manhood, he devoted all his efforts to bringing his wicked uncle to justice and thereby restoring order to the world. The conflict between these two gods raged for many decades. On one level, it was a struggle in which the son sought just revenge on his father's killer. On another, a cosmic struggle to restore universal order. As the lord of disorder, Set was the enemy of Horus and the organized world that Horus stood for. This enmity was part of the Egyptian order, a darkness against which the divine light could shine. Horus was also closely associated with Egypt's rulers, the pharaohs, who were regarded as his earthly incarnations. That's why incest among the royalty was also common, I guess, because they were seen as direct descendants from Horus, or, well, from gods. The contest between the two gods, one in the prime of his youth and the other still mighty both in strength and cunning, was an epic one that lasted for many decades. At one time, Horus with his mother Isis' help was on the point of killing Set, when Isis had a sudden change of heart, intervening in her mercy to save Set's life. In his battle frenzy, Horus turned his wrath on his mother, attacking her savagely and so arousing the anger of the other gods. Swinging wildly with his copper knife, he even managed to sever her head, although, as mistress of magic, Isis was quickly able to repair the damage. Ashamed of his act, Horus fled into the wilderness, where the gods scoured the earth in search for this miscreant. It was Set who found him, resting beside an oasis. His old enemy took the form of a black boar to launch his attack. Before Horus knew what was happening, Set had gouged out his left eye and tossed it beyond the edge of the world. Horus retaliated by ripping off one of Set's testicles. Given that the two opponents were gods, the injuries had cosmic connotations. Horus' left eye was the moon, whose light was thereby lost to the world. By Set's partial emasculation was subsequently used to explain the infertility of the desert, with which he had been associated from early times. Meanwhile, with the moon gone, the earth was plunged each nightfall into the deepest darkness. With disaster threatening, the wise ibis-headed Tut came to the rescue. Ever the peacemaker during the conflict between the two rivals, he now scoured the chaos beyond the world's confines until he discovered the missing eye. It had been shattered by its fall, but Tut pieced it together and restored it to its owner, thereby bringing light back to the night sky. Tut did it again. He's such a bro, honestly. He's a pretty good god. Anyways, with this chapter finished, let's see what Set was up to when he wasn't battling and going after Horus. The wives of Set. Following Seth's story and unsuccessful battle with Horus for the Egyptian throne, the goddess Nave suggested to the Council of Gods that Set be awarded a loser's prize. The foreign daughters of Re, named Anat and Astarte, were offered to him as his wives. One day, as Set was walking by the Nile, he came across the goddess Anat, bathing in the stream. He changed himself into a ram and raped her. But Anna could only be impregnated by divine fire, so her body expelled his semen with such force that it struck him in the forehead, making him dangerously ill. Set was relieved of his punishing headache by Re, whom Isis sent to cure him. In another myth, of which only a part has ever been found, the gods of Egypt were in conflict with the sea god Yam, and were coming of worse. Yam demanded tribute of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli, which was duly brought to him by the goddess Untitled. However, having received these treasures, he became greedy for more, and insisted on further tribute. He threatened that, if his demands were not met, he would enslave every god in Egypt. In despair, Untitled pleaded for help from Astarte, who was famed both for her beauty and her ferocity. The messenger, in the shape of a bird, begged Astarte to carry the extra tribute to Yam. Reluctantly, Astarte agreed, but when she reached the shoreline, her fiery nature got the better of her, and she began to taunt the sea god. Alternately, outraged by her impudence and bewitched by her alluring features, Yam demanded that he be given Astarte, as well as the treasures. The goddess Untitled retired to deliberate with the gods, who acceded to the sea god's demands and furnished Astarte with a dowry consisting of Nut's necklace and Geb's signet ring. Set, however, ravaged at the loss of his beautiful wife. Sadly, the remainder of the story is lost, but the outcome surely was that, whether by force or by guile, Set overcame the sea god, saved Egypt's pantheon from slavery, and reclaimed Astarte. So, here we have one myth where Set actually wasn't the bad guy. Well, in the later part of it, in the second one, taking back his wife and freeing Egypt from Yam's iron fist. I think it's pretty sad though for the pantheon of Egyptian gods that all of them couldn't go against Yam. Set had to get angry first to free them, but all of them, they just obliged Yam's requests or demands, I guess. It's more like demands, not requests, right? I find it also a little bit sad, but also funny that no one cared to tell Set that he cannot impregnate his other wife, Anat, and that he just got his semen shot against his head. Yeah, but we also read in this myth that Isis sent Re to cure Set of his headache. I'm wondering now though, how did she got that power over Re? Re or Ra is the sun god after all, right? The god that created all life. In some myths even, he created humans from his sweat and tears. So what did Isis do to actually take over command over him? Isis and the name of the sun god. Isis was a clever woman, explained one story, more intelligent than countless gods. She was ignorant of nothing in heaven or on earth. She wanted to place herself and her son Horus at the head of the pantheon of gods, and the only way to do this was to discover Re's secret name. One day, Isis came upon Re when he was asleep, snoring loudly. From the corner of his open mouth hung a long dribble of saliva, which gathered weight and fell to the ground. Isis pounced, Scooping up the spittle, she mixed it with clay in the form of a poisonous snake. Then she breathed magic into the snake to make it come alive. Isis had noted Ray's movements and knew that every so often he would leave his palace to go for a walk. Each time on his route, he passed a crossroads. Isis left her snake there and waited further developments. Ray emerged for his excursion and, as Isis had planned, the snake bit him. Ray saw nothing, but he felt the poison coursing through him. In pain, he called to the other gods for help. Ray had the fever and was sweating and shivering, but the gods were helpless. They could do no more than mourn the impending loss of the sun. Isis then made the dramatic entrance. She could cure him, she said, but only if he would tell her his name. Ray refused. She offered again and again, but still he declined. Eventually, his agony became so extreme that he could bear it no longer, and he agreed to give Isis the secret, on condition that she should tell it to no one other than her son Horus. Isis accepted these terms, and speaking aloud the god's true name, she removed the poison. The sun god was cured at once, and Isis and Horus attained the power that they had sought. So, it kinda seemed like Ray was never going to tell her his name, right? So, I'm wondering now if Ray died in this tale, would Isis still take over his place in the end then? Who would have become the new sun god? Horus? I really wonder actually about this. But not just did Ray give away his name in this tale, he also had to assert his dominance over mankind that wanted to overthrow him. So he didn't just have problems with Isis, but also with the humans that once maybe worshipped him. So what do you think he did to assert his dominance again? He hopefully didn't send a bloodthirsty beast to Earth that killed everyone and bathed in its victim's blood, right? Right? The destruction of humankind. Ray, as a ruler of man, was past his prime, but his age did not prevent him from hearing that men were mocking him and plotting to overthrow him. Calling the gods to a secret conference, he asked their advice. Nun, as the eldest, was the one to whom he listened most avidly. Nun advised Ray to punish the blasphemers by scorching them with his blazing heat. However, when Ray did this, his victims ran for shelter to the rocks and escaped his fury. So he reconvened the gods, who told him to send his eye in the form of Hathor to punish humankind. In the guise of the lioness Sekhmet, Hathor perpetrated a savage slaughter. By the time she was recalled by Ray, she had acquired an insatiable taste for blood and was determined to return to Earth to destroy the rest of humankind. Ray was alarmed. He had meant only to teach people a lesson, not to wipe them out. While Hathor rested, he sent messengers to Aswan to bring back a consignment of red ochre. He ordered the high priest of Heliopolis to pound it. As this was done, the god ordered servant girls to brew barley beer. The two elements were mixed together to produce 7,000 jugs of an intoxicating drink that looked like blood. Ray ordered the jugs to be emptied over the fields, where Hathor had planned her destruction for the next day. Hathor was taken in by the ruse. Flying over the fields, she saw what she thought to be blood, and swooped down for a drink. She ambled it too much and fell into a stupor. On regaining her senses, she had forgotten her original aim and set off home again. As a reconciliatory gesture, Ray decreed that the Egyptian people could drink as much as they liked at Hathor's festivals, in commemoration of Hathor, Lady of Drunkenness. Wow-e. And there we have it once again. Beer brings peace. Think about this story when you enjoy your next beer. But drink in moderation, okay? Not like Hathor. Well, while the gods had many troubles, the humans had their own problems to deal with as well. Kunsu and the Princess of Hati. In the second millennium, Egypt waged a long war with the Hittite Empire. The conflict was ended finally by the marriage of Ramses II to the daughter of the Hittite ruler, the king of Hati. Ramses bestowed upon his wife the name of Nivrure. Shortly after the wedding, a messenger arrived from the king of Hati. He brought news that Nivrure's sister, Bentrish, was seriously ill. The pharaoh summoned his top physicians and magicians to ask them their opinion on what this disease might be. When they were unable to reach a diagnosis, he dispatched the royal doctor himself. 3 years later, this doctor returned home. The princess, he announced, was possessed by evil spirits, and only a god could cure her. Ramses consulted the priest at the shrine of Kunsu in Thebes. The priest, in turn, put the question to Kunsu, whose statue nodded its head as a sign that he agreed to be taken to cure the princess. However, in his role as protector of Thebes, the moon god Kunsu had to stay in his city. The priest therefore sought help from the other, subsidiary form of the god, Kunsu the expeller of demons. After a journey of 17 months, Kunsu the expeller of demons reached the Hittite capital and cured Bentrish on the spot. Bentrish's father, however, was so impressed by the statue's power to hear that he refused to let it go, and made a shrine for it in his own kingdom. For almost 4 years, the statue stayed where it was, until the king of Hati was visited by a prophetic dream. In it, the statue of Kunsu rose from its shrine, in the form of a golden falcon, and swooped down at the king before rising into the sky and heading for Egypt. Realizing his error, the king sent the statue back to Thebes, along with a huge tribute. The statue presented the senior Kunsu with the entire Hittite booty, without having even removed any items of treasure and recompense for the priest of its own shrine in Hati. There are quite some things I find interesting about this story. First, that the Egyptians did nothing for over 4 years and probably would have for longer if the king of Hati didn't had his prophetic dream. And second, how I guess the hidden guilt of the king manifested into this prophecy of him dying by the statue's ghost. Our next tales will be full of magic. The Turquoise Pendant. In the second of the 3 tales of wonder contained in the Vesca papyrus, Prince Bouvre tells of his father's father, King Snufru, and Snufru's lecture priest Jajamank. The day was especially hot. Bored to distraction, King Snufru summoned Jajamank, one of his lecture priests, and demanded entertainment. Jajamank came up with a plan. The king should go out in a boat on the palace lake, where he could cool off and take in the beauty of the scenery. To add to Snufru's enjoyment, it was suggested that the boat be rowed by 20 of the most attractive girls from the royal harem. The king's downcast visage brightened at once. "Let the boat be fitted with gilded oars of ebony and sandalwood," he ordered enthusiastically. The guilds were instructed to replace their regular linen shifts with nets of faience beads that scarcely concealed their curves. At first, all went well. The king reclined happily, enjoying the flowers, the birds and the fish of his lake, but devoting most of his attention to the efforts of the scantily clad crew. After a while, however, the leading rower inadvertently dropped the fine turquoise pendant she wore on her braided hair into the lake. She cried out in dismay, and the rowing stopped. The poor girl was distraught at her loss. Indulgently, the king offered to replace the lost pendant from his own abundant reserve of turquoise. But the girl insisted that nothing other than the return of her own ornament would satisfy her. "Jajamank," called the king, "solve the problem." The lecture priest bowed, and at once uttered a powerful spell. Instantly, the waters of the lake rolled back to reveal the amulet lying safely on the dry bed. Jajamank retrieved it, climbed back to the lake bank, and used another spell to return the lake to its former level. Snufru was deeply impressed by Jajamang's prodigious powers and rewarded the servant with riches. The girl put her amulet back in her hair, and the rowing party continued throughout a long and happy afternoon. Reading the story makes me wish to be on that boat, to be honest. It must have been so beautiful there. The glittering water, the scenery, the warm sun on the bright blue sky, and the slight breeze cooling you down. Doesn't that just sound like heaven? But onward to our next tale. A battle between two sorcerers from Nubia and Egypt. Who do you think will win? The Sorcerer and the Sorcerer of Nubia. One day a haughty Nubian appeared before the court of King Ramses II in Memphis and challenged the scholars of Egypt, testing their abilities in magic. Holding a sealed papyrus up to the king, he asked, "Can anyone here read this letter without opening it?" Perplexed by the Nubian's challenge and fearing humiliation, Ramses called for Prince Setna, the most learned of his sons. Setna too was baffled, but rather than admit defeat, he asked for 10 days' grace to wrestle with the problem. Setna had no idea how to read the strange letter, and simply fretted anxiously at home. When his young son Seosiah tried to comfort him, he said, "You are only 12. A child cannot help me here." Eventually, however, Seosiah persuaded his father to explain the problem. "But that's easy," laughed the boy. "I can do that." He asked Setna to bring him a papyrus scroll. As the boy promised, he was able to read it while his father held it still rolled up. The next day, Seosiah went with his father to meet the pharaoh and the arrogant Nubian. At once, the boy proceeded to read from the scroll tied to the Nubian's belt, and what he read shocked the court. It was a tale from the distant past, when the prince of Nubia had used the powers of his magician Sa-Naheset to bring Egypt's pharaoh to the Nubian court. There, he received a brutal and shameful beating. The pharaoh, in turn, sought magical aid from his own master magician, Sa-Paneshi, and the struggle between the two nations turned into a battle of wits between two great magicians, which Sa-Paneshi eventually won. The young Seosiah reached the end of his reading. "Now, O king," said the boy, "I can tell you why this Nubian is here, for he is Sa-Naheset, born again. But I too have been reborn. I'm Sa-Paneshi, and I challenge him once again." For hours the sorcerers fought spell against spell, the one seeking to destroy Egypt's court, the other to save it. At last, Seosiah, or Sa-Paneshi, sent a fire spell. The other could not resist, and Sa-Naheset was consumed in flames. Wowee! I just love this one. The fight must have been so epic. Even though I'm finding myself not often in battle myself, it's always a spectacle to see two other mages fight each other. There's one interesting thing though that I want to note. We read earlier that Isis is the only god with magical powers, right? So how come a lot of humans were able to cast magic then? Are these humans stronger than gods in the end? What do you think? Our next story will be about a sailor that stranded on a mysterious island. On his return from an unsuccessful trade mission in Nubia, an Egyptian envoy bemoaned his misfortune, provoking a sailor to console him by telling a tale that began with tragedy but ended happily. An unnamed sailor was on a voyage on the Red Sea, destined for the royal mines. His 200-foot-long vessel was well appointed and stoutly manned by more than 100 crewmen. But then the sky suddenly darkened and a violent storm overwhelmed the ship. She vanished beneath the waves, as did everyone on board, except the narrator. The survivor managed to stay afloat, bobbing on the now calm surface of the sea, but he was beginning to lose strength. Just in time he found himself washed ashore on an island that had all the appearance of an earthly paradise. It was overflowing with fruits and vegetables, and all the fish and fowl the hungry sailor could wish for. However, a giant serpent with a body of gold and eyebrows of lapis lazuli also lived there. The monster threatened the sailor with instant incineration if he did not explain his arrival. But the sailor was rigid with fear. The serpent took him to its lair, whereupon the sailor recounted his tale. The serpent then told his own sorry story. "Once there were 75 snakes here," it said, "including all my kin. But a burning star fell and killed all of them except me. Fate will be kinder to you. A ship will arrive in 4 months and you will return safely to your home." The ship arrived as the snake had promised, and the sailor boarded it, laden with gifts from the now friendly monster. On his return home, the king was so pleased that he made the voyager a royal attendant and granted him many servants. I really like in this one the happy ending, but I do wonder how the star only killed the snake friends and not any other vegetation or animals on that island. While most myths that we read today are just that, myths, our last one for today was actually proven by archaeologists to be true. It was written down by Herodotus, a Greek historian, geographer and ethnologist, who traveled to Egypt and who was the first author of the first comprehensive history of Egypt. The Festival of Bastet. Herodotus told of a festival held annually at the Delta city of Bubastis in honor of the goddess Bastet. His account was widely believed to be a fabrication until archaeologists discovered evidence to confirm that the event did take place. Daughter of the sun god Re and mother of the moon god Kunsu, the feline deity Bastet was widely venerated throughout ancient Egypt. By the late period, Bastet's festival, held in April and May, was one of the most popular in the ritual calendar. For ceremonial purposes, the town of Bubastis, 50 miles northeast of modern Cairo, was best approached by water. "They come in barges," wrote the ancient Greek historian Herodotus of the festival. "Men and women together, a great number in each boat. On the way, some of the women keep up a continual clatter with castanets, and some of the men play flutes, while the rest, both men and women, sing and clap their hands. Whenever they pass a town on the riverbank, they bring the barge close inshore. Some of the women continuing to act as I have said, while others shout abuse at the women of the place, or start dancing, or stand up and hitch their skirts. When they reach Bubastis, they celebrate the festival with elaborate sacrifices, and more wine is consumed than during all the rest of the year." Herodotus recorded at least 700,000 people, excluding children, arriving in similar fashion to pay their respect at the red granite temple erected in honor of the goddess. Again, according to Herodotus, cats which have died are taken to Bubastis, where they are embalmed and buried in sacred receptacles. Thousands of the dead creatures were mummified and interred in underground galleries here and at other sites so that they might carry their owners' messages all the more swiftly to the realm of the gods. The sheer scale of the festival seemed incredible to early Egyptologists, but in 1887, a Swiss archaeologist called Henry Edward Neville excavated the site, discovered that Herodotus had indeed spoken the truth. He uncovered the site of Bubastis' main temple, the catacombs of mummified cats, and a number of pharaonic shrines, which proved that even the highest-born venerated Bastet. What was your favorite myth of tonight? Is there something that especially interests you or you want to delve deeper into? Write me what you think and I might make an extra video of your interests, okay? My favorite one was the Enchanted Island and the Sorcerer of Nubia, because I just liked the Sorcerer battle and the good ending of the Enchanted Island. Tell me also how you like this video in general. I would love to make more of these in the future, and I would also obviously love for you to enjoy them. So I want to do my best to make them as good as possible for you guys. Next week, though, we will make our way to Herodotus' home country, Greece, and its myths and tales about thirsty gods and betraying heroes. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a good night, sleep well, my little pip, and I hope to see you next week. Goodbye!